Sorry, are you okay also, Daldan, if I record?
Yeah, totally.
Okay, nice. Good, let's wait one more minute and we can start having a bit of... I also share the potential agenda in the...
Yeah, I got it open.
Cool. So, but yeah, feel free to add topics or suggest order if you consider it.
Well, maybe since we are waiting, I know it's not part of the agenda, but since I'm let's call it a new joiner.
Yeah, that's right.
Is there already? I mean, I've been reading quite a lot about the whole purpose, also this kind of welcome and onboarding process. So, what will be the next, let's say, task project or that could contribute? Is the outcome of this meeting the?
Yeah, yeah, if you want to go, yeah, I would say what I was thinking is maybe we can work with you on the implementation on this new integration, and with the support of me and Sam and Paulo, that are the ones that we already did the hackathon on Osmotic. But yeah, I think this it has a bit of everything, smart contracts, and also a lot of Web3 tasks that you will need to do so. So I think that would be a good way to do it. This task. But yeah, the intention. Yeah, sorry.
Oh, I was going to say the reason I hopped in too is because to our discussion before we turn the recording on, there's the sort of implementation and then there's the sort of understanding of how to use or tune it. And I'm hoping that this will be like a opportunity for a sort of a Luna Swarm spike in parallel, where the implementation aspect is going to be planned out, but then that some level of a relatively simple modeling could be produced to help make decisions about how to sort of tune it to make it useful for in practice. But for that, I'm really offering support like we did with the issuance stuff maybe a year ago now. I'm running an R&D firm, and so I'm a little bit swamped and not realistically going to do the modeling myself, but I'm always looking for opportunities to teach people how to do that in like a practical applied way. So if you guys know anyone who's more interested in like simulation and modeling, then I think what we would want to do is set up like a maybe bi-weekly cadence for what I would generally think of as a Luna Swarm meeting, where we support whoever takes that work on. But I view it as parallel to the implementation because it's more about how to understand and how to use the thing and less about how to get it implemented.
Yeah. To give a bit of context to Tiago and Dado, is what is the Luna Swarm? We create this other working group in Garden in One Hive that helps with token engineering tasks to have a better understanding on how the systems might work in practice before actually going ahead and implementing it. And there was some work done on conviction voting and the issuance that we are currently using. So the intention now is to also maybe in parallel while we work on the implementation, also do some token engineering modeling for this particular application as well. And the thing that comes to mind is maybe myself and with help of Sam, or maybe if Luke is also around, I can take that task of maybe, of course, if you can give a bit of support, Michael, that would be awesome. And then I can feedback to the developer team on that will be doing the actual implementation.
Are we waiting for somebody else, Gabi?
I think Chef maybe, but Anup was not able to join this time. So yeah, I think we are everyone on this chat might be missing.
Yeah, Jeff might hop in, but I know he also is pretty busy. So if anything, maybe make sure he gets the access to the recording so he knows what's up. I think he'd probably be more likely to support on the Luna side. And my reason for bringing it up is just Luna Swarm isn't so much like a ongoing funded swarm. It's more of a spikes, sort of research spikes type swarm. So if we want to do stuff there, we kind of need to identify it, draw it out, maybe even write a proposal if we want to be able to fund someone else who's learning to support. We might need a separate proposal to represent the Luna Swarm related work in parallel with the development work. And so I generally put that on folks and say, hey, look, if you do this, I will show up and provide support and not ask for any payouts. That's just sort of the model I've been using for Luna Swarm as a sort of research group that spikes in response to OneHive's needs.
Makes sense. Cool.
So if you guys, Gabi, could give a little bit of context, what is this fluid proposal thing for Daniel?
Yeah, for sure. This fluid proposal is like an extension of what we currently have on Gardens, and I can quickly show my screen to you, and that's part of the agenda, but maybe a bit. But yeah, let me share and let me see if you see the screen.
Yes.
Cool. This is the current Gardens website, and the user, what is usually seen when they are interacting with the UI is this kind of proposals that are sometimes suggestions for potentially things that the organization could do. For example, fork and align on the OneHive direction is a suggestion, but it's not having an implication on the treasury per se, but only like a way of putting the community in a certain direction. And that anyway has an influence on the system of conviction voting. But then you also have this other kind of proposal, like founding proposals that are also requesting funds from the common pools from the organization. And this is the treasury that the organization has to expend. So both proposals has influence each other, and that's how conviction voting works. And I can link you more in details articles and about to understand better how conviction voting works. But the intention of this fluid proposal is to be a new kind of proposal here, even though maybe underneath might be happening a few things. But the intention is, when the people are connecting their account and interacting with the website, they will be able to choose another kind of proposal, and that will be the fluid proposal. And that proposal will have a different effect. Instead of requesting a slammed amount of funds, these funds that will be like streamed to the beneficiary continuously in a period of time. And for that, we will be using a protocol called Superfluid. So to give a bit of context, we did a MVP of this kind of a behavior in a hackathon. And this was mostly done by two members, Paulo and Sam. And the intention here is that you also have a viable amount of funds, like we have in Gardens, like a common pool, and an amount of tokens that are being used in the system. And then you have all proposals like we have, but in this case are these kind of fluid proposals where they can be active or they can be accruing support, like similar to what we have in OneHive. But once the threshold, that's something, Daniel, that you will be learning more in once you dive deeper in the conviction voting, is reached, instead of releasing the funds right away, this will be like a fluid stream of funds being always transferred from the common pool while the threshold of participants is being, while enough people is supporting that and reaching that threshold. So yeah, you are able to. Sorry.
I was gonna say, like, if you have questions about it, you can reach out to me. I did the original conviction voting design work and the research that led to that design work. So it's like ancient now, but the general gist of it is that conviction sort of charges up over time. You can read about it. But the model that we ended up using when we were working on this stuff way back in the day for funding allocation was like a neuron firing, right? You charge up until you cross a threshold, and then a discrete event happens and you make a payment. Like in this model, you could imagine like you want a bucket of water with 100 units of honey in it, or a bucket of honey, I guess. And then when the conviction crosses the threshold, you get the whole bucket, but that's a one-time thing. What's so interesting about this is that it's actually more natural to shift in a direction where there's a flow of honey, which the conviction that it regulates the flow rate. And so the whole system sort of moves in a more organic direction while still giving the participants the capacity to modulate or regulate this. And there's a couple edge cases that we'll need to talk about, probably probably minimums, like you don't necessarily want to turn the faucet on if you can't get above a certain threshold. I think some of that stuff may already be in the proposals, but the nuts and bolts of it is that there's an existing mechanism that is charge up an event, and we've got this opportunity to do something where the charging up and down is actually the flow rate regulator. Is there anything I missed important, Gabby?
No, I think that's in this right
the charging it's like 100%. If it reach 100%, then it's like that.
Yeah, the existing thing is continuous to discrete. So you charge up, but you get nothing unless you cross a threshold. And when the threshold is crossed, you get the whole thing all at once. Whereas the new thing, the thing that's being designed and implemented now, takes this stuff actually a little closer to the original design intents, which is part of the reason why I showed up. I'm actually really excited because when I first posited conviction voting, it was intended for things that were continuous, not necessarily for discrete events. We layered in the discrete events based on the specific needs for budget allocation. And so this is a way of moving it back towards its original intent, which is to manage sort of continuous parameters, in this case, like flow rates.
And
I already have a question.
Yeah, sure, Daniel. Go ahead.
Yeah, but the conviction voting is actually supposed to be reached up to 100%. But how will the streaming work? Because how do you know if you reached or you didn't? Because you want to give some sort of percentage by streaming, right? Like every X amount of time, right? Or did I miss that?
Yeah, so we're changing fundamentally the paradigm for the existing conviction voting proposals is you ask for a discrete amount out of honey. You have it's a percentage of the total supply of honey available, and there's a rule that says how much conviction you would need to achieve before that discrete event triggers and you get the bucket of honey, right? In this case, it needs to be abstracted once more to say maybe there's a minimum before the faucet turns on, a level of conviction that's like a bottom level threshold rule, but once you cross that threshold rule, there would be a flow rate. But if you got more conviction, the flow rate would go up, and if you had less conviction, the flow rate would go down. But I was pointing out that in order for this to make sense, there needs to be an edge on the bottom. Just basically, you still have the discrete event type logic that says this is enough conviction to start the flow. And if you cross that, you'd probably want it to turn off. But then above that, there will be some sort of range over which more conviction means more flow and less conviction means less flow. We may also have to think about top level. Like, again, we don't want these things to drain too fast. So we also have to look at the upper limit. So what happens as the conviction of that flow proposal gets really high. And so this is the kind of stuff that I was saying also kind of I generally attribute to the Luna Swarm, which is that you can get the main machinery of combining with the fluid protocols and the conviction voting going, but the actual policy making, the rules that show up in that code need to account for edge cases and limiting behavior, like the stuff that I was just talking about.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's what Paulo and Sem spend the most time on the hackathon, like trying to figure out like some of a good core behavior for having that specific thing you were mentioning, Michael. And I think they kind of did an integral of in Solidity, but yeah, I think that's the thing that we need to parametricize and have a better idea with a model. So yeah, you're right on that. The last thing I want to quickly demo is the Superfluid app. And this is one of the alternatives we are considering using. This is a recent app that did by also the Blossom team. And what it does is allow Aragon apps to be able to interact with Superfluid, creating flows. So this app will be able to handle the wrapper around the Superfluid protocol. So we will be able to set up certain permissions and certain, like I was on the discussion, like a middleware app that will be the one keeping track of the information from conviction voting and then executing the necessary flows, updates in this app. So that's one way of doing it.
That was something I wanted to ask you about, actually, because I was kind of assuming something like that, but I have never seen the API spec for Superfluid. So like behind the scenes, like what are the parameters? Like basically how are the fund flows managed and what are the parameters available? Because the challenge would be the dynamic nature of the flow rate and sort of what affordances in the Superfluid contracts allowed you to modulate rates.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And this is something that can be extended further on the Superfluid contracts, because they have this concept of agreements that are like kind of modules that you can extend. But right now, they only have, this was done with a constant flow agreement. So this is like the default they have already. And there was some work done in this hackathon to have like a dynamic flow rate to be able to do like what you were saying, but needs a bit more work to have it done at least, because it was more. Yep.
That reminds me of something else one of my team members working on that might have some overlap. We were, doing some stuff that relates to continuous payments for the streamer project. Actually, some of the stuff I shared, the open source stuff I shared came from that research. Similarly, there's like a sort of generic extension that's needed for Superfluid, in my opinion, which is to say like basically external signal base. Even though external might be another smart contract, you effectively need Oracle weighted Superfluid. If you can architect it so that it's just able to read an external URI of sorts to get the weighting information, then that would be a really, I think, generally very, very valuable extension of Superfluid.
Yeah, I think that's kind of what we were discussing when we started talking about this Superfluid, the fluid proposal idea, and that's what we were intended to be using conviction voting at first, and signal proposals in particular as this way of.
I think what I'm getting at is that assuming that you have the right data structure for a weighting information, like weighting, you could basically have weighted, dynamic weighted Superfluid, as long as the weighting function was defined in terms of some sort of external read, even if that's an on-chain read. And then you could use a composition to another contract to provide the necessary, again, struct containing addresses. And imagine a struct containing addresses and integers, and then effectively, as long as you pointed to that struct, then you could do that struct weighted distribution of superfluid, and it wouldn't matter whether it was, token holdings, conviction, like as long as you could clarify that the expected thing you're reading from is addresses by integers, and then when you read that thing, you provided flows proportional to that struct, you could basically use the same extension of superfluid for a wide range of things, especially the one that we're discussing, but it also gives you a lot of modularity if you need to change policies, refine them, or just use the same code for a different use case.
No, that's really interesting. I will need to see again the conversation and take notes on that. But yeah, I think
I guess I am going to have to split in 5 minutes, and I apologize for you guys who don't know me. I've done a lot of smart contract specking and a lot of like data analysis of smart contracts. So even though I'm not a Solidity dev, this is sort of algorithm design, like algorithmic policy design is sort of my jam. So I have lots of opinions.
No, I think that's having that kind of module to extend superfluid makes a lot of sense and will be valuable for more than this app. Hi, Chef. Thanks for jumping up.
Hey, guys. Sorry, I had the time zone mixed up, and sorry, I'm only catching the last 5 minutes. But yeah, I think a lot of the interest in applying this primitive across different tools is very. I'm sure Z was able to present anything that I would have said. But yeah, happy to see these sorts of things happening. And I actually have a post that I'm going to put up on the OneHive forum about osmotic governance as sort of an extension of osmotic funding. I'm interested to kind of how these can be applied in delegated voting systems as well. I think maybe I sent it to you, Gabby, or I sent it to a few people sort of in a small feedback round, and I'm going to post it on the forum just so there's sort of a place to link to for other applications of conviction voting to other, not just for funding tokens, but also for delegated governance tokens, perhaps. I think that's a bit further down the line. So sorry, I didn't mean to
Well, while
side
you're
rail the
here,
convo.
the thing I missed you for was just talking about coordinating some parallel cycles on LunaSwarm. I kind of explained that LunaSwarm is more of a like research spikes in parallel with development in support of the teams that are developing and using these algorithms. And so my main ask was to just sort of get a sense of who's interested in being involved, try to find a recurring time so that we can provide this sort of like, research support, and then ideally source a researcher or two, maybe have a LunaSwarm funding proposal for the spike, not because we want the honey, but because we want to make sure that if we, source some researchers, that their time gets compensated.
Makes sense. No, yeah, I think I can help with that, at least if anyone else later on joins, maybe from tech or some other community member from OneHive. That would be great.
The TEC community in general is one where, and the Token Engineering Academy has a lot of people who are trying to learn these methods, and they don't necessarily get good opportunities to apply them in practice. So I think it could be a really good opportunity, maybe even to get some researchers from that community involved in some LunaSwarm spikes so that they can get hands-on experience rather than just sort of like discussions about token engineering and how great it is.
No, I like that. I can create a intro post sharing maybe what we are thinking about, and if someone want to get involved on the LunaSwarm meetings. So do you think like bi-weekly would be a good time?
Yeah, I think that's about right. It tends to be slower work, so people need more time with like intermittent synchronous, like asynchronous text chat can help as people get stuck. But my experience is that every 2 weeks is a good time frame for Luna stuff, as long as there are some folks whose primary attention is going to be spent doing some stuff in between those sessions.
Good. And I'm not sure if Thiago or Daniel have some questions. I have one in particular about the two open discussion about maybe doing with like this middleware solution using the signaling and superfluid app versus trying to update current conviction voting with a new type of proposal and all the logic. And what are you consider the trade-off? If some of you have some ideas on that.
I don't
Ideas
want to
about,
go ahead.
yeah, no, I was just curious to clarify a bit further. So having sort of conviction voting as one tool and then building a separate code base, or like modifying the existing code base, is that the trade-off that we're discussing?
Yeah, I think probably we if I'm understanding correctly, we might need to update the current conviction voting to have all the stake involved on the three types of proposals.
My proposal would be to modularize. I think the existing conviction voting implementation is a little bit monolithic relative to the underlying signal processing it provides. What I would do would be to separate the logic for the conviction into something like the structs that I was talking about before, where conviction voting would actually just say you allocate your tokens across a bunch of different I guess addresses, or into, I think of it as a vector, a distribution. But then each of the places that the conviction voting, the tokens are mapped to, are accumulating conviction, and that struct would then be something that just existed. You would put tokens in and conviction would accumulate. That thing is just think of it as a hanging bit of state. It's actually just an integrator. Insofar as other applications read from it to make decisions, you can have simultaneously one application related to the current conviction voting, which was checking thresholds and issuing tokens, and a different, really not application, but sort of might think of the smart contract as a kind of microservice, passive microservice, but basically you would have the current flow of conviction voting broken up into two separate modules, one where you essentially expressed your support and conviction accumulated, and so you had this conviction struct. Then the second piece would be the trigger function logic that was tied to the existing conviction voting module, where if and only if a threshold is reached, disperse funds. But then you would have this other superfluid app, which would be a different, again, the signal, the extended, the extended sort of quote unquote Oracle based superfluid would be actually reading from the same struct. So you would share the same like source contract for information, but then each of the two other modules would be doing different things with that information. So it eliminates redundancy in the code base. It allows you to have one contract tracking conviction, but it allows two different modules to make different kinds of decisions predicated on that. That would be a much better like sort of overall modular architecture for what we're talking about doing, but it does come with a cost of like refactoring cost, like but it opens up the opportunity to do any number of other things using conviction. So to Jeff's point about conviction governance, like if you were using that architecture, you could again read from the same struct in order to determine something like sort of a delegation of authority through conviction voting, because ultimately you just have these tokens and you allocate them across these various different pointers, and then the other applications look at those structs and determine what to do in their own context.
Nice. No, yeah, I think it's something we need to wait in, because it will be a big refactor for conviction voting, but I agree with you that we would have much more flexibility on new features.
I know I'm being sort of, I'm being a little bit forceful here, but I think the reason I'm doing it is just from a fundamental understanding of the function of conviction voting. It's a signal it's a noise rejecting signal aggregator mechanism. It's fundamentally just a filter. In fact, it's a low pass filter. It's a way of taking things that are noisy in space and time and produce something that is on average less noisy in space and time, and thus using the less noisy thing to modulate decision making functions. But if you view it as in that really generic light, you can sort of see that it's a sort of native, like, I think of it as a pre-processing algorithm. So you just want to get people to do stuff, then pre-process it using conviction, and then like layer in any number of other integrations upstream, or I guess downstream of that. And if by going that route, you also just make the software more modular, you make it more, and you also make it significantly more extensible. So if you want to see conviction voting as a composable primitive that people use, even, obviously beyond one Hive, which is obviously something I want, then factoring it out has a lot of utility, and demonstrating that factoring it out allows you then to make a second integration on the same core process. And again, I know I'm thinking about this very much from a crypto economic primitives, more organic systems perspective. So I would view this as being valuable above and beyond just making conviction voting plus superfluid work. It would be demonstrating that conviction voting plus insert mechanism here actually works quite well. Again, that being the original design intent. So you can take it whatever direction you want, but I'm always going to advocate, at least for, going back to the first principles.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
The other thing that I would love to see someday is it integrated with continuous parameter selection. So in the case of one Hive, that could look like something like the parameters on the honey issuance policy. Since it has explicit parameters, you could also eventually allow people to use conviction voting to express numerical preferences over parameters, and then use the same basic family of algorithms to do dynamic averaging and end up with things like dynamic continuous parameters for the various protocols. So like there are parameters in conviction voting, there are parameters in decision voting, there are parameters all over one Hive. And so for me, the real like quintessentially cool thing would be when we start allowing people to use their honey and their conviction and a conviction style voting on all of these parameters. In that case, the reason conviction voting is so important is that you need parameters to change slowly. And so the conviction voting layer ensures that parameters don't change in like a jerky fashion. It smooths parameter changes, which is the most basic original purpose for its design, was to vote on parameters and do sort of dynamic averaging and smoothing for parameter selection. So, if you guys think that's cool, then I strongly recommend the factoring out approach, because I would love, even if it's years in the future, I hope it's not years in the future, to see some experiments on, picking a parameter and using conviction voting for dynamic parameter averaging. Sorry if that was way too much, but it's like I personally, this is all about making biomimetic systems. It's about getting the edgy sort of like hard changes out and shifting everything towards like smooth dynamic processes.
I see a lot of interest for those kinds of applications in multiple groups, even in the TEC. They're having a series of successive votes to like decrease their entry tax and increase their exit tax. That could be another dynamic parameter, that could be leveraged with conviction voting. So, and I see, all sorts of different groups looking at sort of integrating the temporal component. And I think the modularization of conviction growth NDK would be really helpful to to make that a reality for these different groups that are looking to integrate the temporal aspect of voting in various ways. Super cool. Cool. So I've got to jump to another call, but so it sounds like we're going to start up some biweekly syncs with LunaSwarm. So we should find a date and a time that works. And then also, I guess we've got the channel in under Gardens. I was just in there, but I always get lost in Discord.
I can coordinate the LunaSwarm and also open a post on Tech to invite some researchers that want to collaborate with us.
Awesome.
And yeah, then we might need to do some internal initial discussion and work with the devs, and we can also circle back with the LunaSwarm and you two guys with some ideas of or the direction we want to go from here, if that makes sense.
Sounds great. Cool. Awesome. Sorry, I missed most of the call. I'm glad I caught the last few minutes, and yeah, happy to connect on this. I think this is one of the most exciting, widely applicable tools that I see a lot of different groups looking for. So, and I mean, OneHive has already done a fantastic job, proving out the concept of conviction voting for treasury allocation. And yeah, I'm really interested to see what happens when we layer in other tools, whether it's superfluid or dynamic parameters. I think there's so much to explore in this space. So happy to do it alongside you guys.
This one project though gives us the impetus to do the refactoring that opens up everything else. From this discussion, just like thinking out loud as we go, realizing that the existing implementation is one thing, really is monolithic, and the fact that we were discussing architecture in terms of the new thing, we don't want a new monolithic thing. Actually factoring out the conviction signal structs allows us to unlock all of these other applications without necessarily doing, a ton of recoding. Basically, we should get to a place where any smart contract or module that is written such that it takes an external struct as a signal or as a source, so it reads from, think of it as an on-chain oracle. As long as you write a smart contract that can read from an on-chain oracle with an appropriate reference, appropriate URI, so to speak, then you can imagine any of those things being able to read from a conviction voting isolated app. And in